The woman at the DMV counter didn't even look up when she scanned my license. She just kept typing, then she stopped. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second too long. She picked up the phone. I thought maybe their system was down. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to bring something. I stood there with my hands folded on the counter like an idiot, watching her speak quietly into the receiver, watching her not look at me, and I thought, this is fine. This is just a Tuesday. It was not fine. It was not just a Tuesday. 2 men in dark jackets came through a side door I hadn't noticed before. One of them showed me a badge so fast I barely read it. FBI. The other one put his hand, not on my arm, but near my arm, the way you do when you want someone to walk with you without making a scene. Ms. Whitfield, he said, could you come with us, please? I remember thinking, he said please. That's good. People who are arresting you don't usually say please. I was wrong about that too. My name, the name I'd been using for 30 years, was Leah Whitfield. I was 29 years old. I worked as a medical billing coordinator for a physical therapy clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. I drove a 2019 Honda Civic with a cracked passenger mirror I kept meaning to fix. I had a plant named Gerald on my windowsill that I'd managed to keep alive for 3 years, which was longer than any of my relationships. I was at the DMV that afternoon because my license had expired 2 weeks earlier and my stepfather's lawyer had sent a letter, the kind with a return address that makes your stomach drop, informing me that I needed to vacate the house I'd been living in. My mother had died 8 months before. My stepfather had waited 8 months, and then he sent a lawyer. The house wasn't mine. I knew that. I'd always known that. But I'd grown up in that house, and after my mother died, I just stayed. I didn't have anywhere else to go that felt like somewhere. The letter said I had 30 days. I'd spent 3 of those days crying. I'd spent the rest of them trying to figure out what I actually needed to function as a human being without a permanent address. Updated license. New P.O. box. Call the bank. Call the clinic. Don't think too hard about what comes next. That's how I ended up at the DMV on a Tuesday afternoon, handing over my birth certificate and my social security card, both of which I had carried in my wallet my entire adult life because my stepfather used to say I was the kind of person who lost things. He said a lot of things like that. The back room at the DMV was smaller than I expected. There was a folding table and 4 chairs and a water cooler that made a gurgling sound every few minutes, like it was trying to say something. The agent who'd said please sat across from me. His name was Agent Morrow. The other one stood near the door. Agent Morrow set a manila folder on the table but didn't open it yet. Miss Whitfield, he said, when did you first receive this social security number? I told him I didn't know. You don't remember getting a social security number. It's just something you have. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. The number on your card, he said, was issued to a child born in 1994 in Charlotte, North Carolina. That child passed away at 4 months old. I heard the words. I understood them individually. Together, they didn't make any sense. I was born in Charlotte, I said, in 1994. We know, he said. He opened the folder. I don't know how to explain what it feels like to look at a photograph of yourself as a baby and be told that the baby in the photograph is not you, except it was me. That was the thing. I could see it. I've seen my baby pictures my whole life. The same round face, the same dark eyes, the same little fist pressed against my cheek. My mother used to say I came out of the womb looking suspicious. The photograph Agent Morrow showed me was a missing child flyer. The kind you used to see on milk cartons. The child in the photograph was 3 months old, so there wasn't much to look at, just a baby. But the baby looked like me. The name on the flyer was not Leah Whitfield, it was Cecilia Drummond. The Drummond family, Agent Morrow said carefully, reported their infant daughter missing in January 1995. She was taken from their home in Charlotte. The case was never closed. I stared at the flyer for a long time. That's 30 years ago, I said. Yes, I'm 29. You were 3 months old when you were reported missing. I looked at the water cooler. It gurgled. My mother, I started. Miss Whitfield. Agent Morrow's voice was very gentle, and that was somehow the worst part. The woman who raised you. We have some questions about how she came to have custody of you. My mother had been dead for 8 months. I could not ask her anything. What I knew about my mother. She was warm, and she was funny, and she smelled like lavender soap, and she was not good with money, and she cried at commercials, and she loved me completely, the way you love something that is entirely yours. What I was starting to understand, I might not have been entirely hers. She'd married my stepfather when I was 6. I have almost no memories of before that, just fragments. A kitchen with yellow curtains, a stuffed rabbit I called Bun Bun, the sound of my mother singing in another room. When I tried to assemble those fragments into something coherent, they wouldn't hold. I'd always told myself that was just how early childhood worked. You don't remember being 3. My stepfather's name was Warren. He was a property manager with a company that handled commercial real estate in the Research Triangle area. He was the kind of man who wore polo shirts tucked in on the weekends and had strong opinions about lawn care. He had 2 grown children from his first marriage. He had never in 23 years looked at me the way he looked at them. I used to think it was a step-parent thing. A lot of my friends had step-parents. Some of them were fine, some of them weren't. Warren wasn't fine, but he wasn't monstrous either. He was just cold. Like a room where someone forgot to turn the heat on. You can live in that room. You just never stop being a little bit cold. He never hit me. He never screamed at me. What he did was smaller than that. He corrected my grammar at dinner. He left my school pictures off the mantel. When I graduated from college, he shook my hand instead of hugging me, and I watched his actual daughter throw her arms around him an hour later, and I thought, okay, I know where I stand. After my mother died, I found out exactly where I stood. She had a small life insurance policy, $75,000. It went to Warren as her spouse. The house was in both their names. He hadn't waited the full 8 months out of generosity. He'd waited because his lawyer told him to. When I came home to clear out my things, he said, I know this is hard. But you have to understand, Leah, you were never really mine. I thought he meant it as a legal statement. A practical one, about the house. Standing in that DMV back room, looking at a missing child flyer, I started to think he might have meant something else entirely. The next 4 days were the strangest of my life, which is saying something given recent context. Agent Morrow connected me with a victim's advocate named Terry, who had the kind of steady calm that you only develop by sitting across from a lot of people in crisis. She explained what the FBI knew, what they suspected, and what they still needed to figure out. She used the phrase, ongoing investigation, several times. She brought me coffee without being asked. What they knew, the social security number on my card belonged to a deceased infant. This was a documented method used in identity fraud cases, particularly in cases where infants were taken and given new identities by people who wanted to erase paper trails. What they suspected. My mother had not acted alone and had not acted spontaneously. There was evidence suggesting she had paid someone. The amount, Terry told me carefully, was significant. What they needed to figure out everything else. I asked if I was in trouble. Terry said no. I was a victim. I had been a victim since I was 3 months old. I sat with that for a minute. The Drummonds, I said. The family. Are they still in Charlotte? Terry looked at me for a moment. The father passed away in 2019. The mother is still living. You have an older brother. He's 34. I didn't say anything. There's no rush, Terry said. There's absolutely no rush on any of this. Warren found out that I knew on a Thursday. I don't know how he found out. I hadn't told anyone. But he called me. I was staying at a hotel the Bureau had arranged, and his voice was the same as it always was. Measured. A little clipped. The voice of a man who considered composure a virtue and emotion a kind of weakness. I think we should talk, he said. I don't think we should, I said. Leah. A pause. I know you're upset. But there are things you don't understand about the situation. Which situation? The one where my entire identity was fabricated. Or the one where you knew and you never said anything? Silence. It was a long silence. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. You knew the whole time. Your mother made choices before I was in the picture, but you found out. At some point you found out, and you stayed, and you never told me. It was complicated. I was a stolen child, Warren. He didn't say anything to that. What is there to say to that? You had a life insurance policy, I said. My voice was very level. I didn't plan for it to be level, it just was. My mother's life insurance. $75,000, that was legally. And the house, which is worth about $420,000 in the current market, I checked. And my mother's savings account, which you were a co-signer on. And the car. And the jewelry, Leah. My name, I said, is Cecilia. I hung up. Here is what I did not know at the time, and what I wish I had known, because it would have made the next 3 weeks slightly less terrifying. When law enforcement discovers that a missing child has been located, even 30 years later, even as an adult, certain things begin to move very quickly. The FBI had been building a case for 11 days before they contacted me at the DMV. They had financial records. They had phone records from 1994. They had a woman in Greensboro who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. A woman who had, in 1994, facilitated the transfer of a 3-month-old baby from a young mother in a desperate situation to a couple who had paid $40,000 in cash. $40,000. My mother had paid $40,000 in cash for me. I spent a long time thinking about that number, about what it means to be worth $40,000, about what it means to be purchased, about whether being loved completely by someone who bought you changes the quality of the love, or just the circumstances of it. I still don't have a clean answer to that. I don't think I ever will. Warren's lawyer contacted the FBI 3 days after my phone call. He was claiming that Warren had no knowledge of the circumstances of my birth or my identity, that he had been as deceived as anyone, that any assets from my mother's estate had been legally obtained by a lawful spouse. Agent Morrow called to give me a heads up. He's going to try to keep the estate, I said. That's our read, yes? Can he? There was a pause. That's going to depend on what our forensic accountants find, and on your attorney. I didn't have an attorney. I had $3,200 in my checking account, a cracked mirror on my Honda Civic, and a plant named Gerald sitting on the windowsill of a house I'd been evicted from. I found my attorney through a legal aid referral. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when everything is falling apart, sharp, unhurried, and completely unimpressed by Warren's lawyer's letters. She read through the estate documents with the expression of someone completing a crossword puzzle. Not alarmed, just working. He's making a legitimate argument, she told me. Under North Carolina intestate law, a surviving spouse has a rightful claim. But, she tapped the folder, the circumstances here aren't ordinary. They really aren't, I said. There's a legal doctrine called Constructive Trust. She leaned back. The short version. If someone benefits financially from a fraud, even if they didn't commit the fraud themselves, a court can determine that the assets were never rightfully theirs to begin with. They hold the assets in constructive trust for the person who was actually wronged. I looked at her. So even if Warren didn't know, if it can be shown that the assets he inherited were connected to the original crime, that his wife's entire financial situation, the house, the savings, the insurance, the life she built, was built on the proceeds of buying a stolen child. She paused. Then a court could find that he was never the rightful beneficiary of any of it. And where does it go? She looked at me steadily. To you. Warren showed up in person 2 weeks later. Not at my hotel, I'd moved by then, staying with a colleague from the clinic who had a pull-out couch and a very patient cat. He showed up at Miss Okafor's office, in his tucked-in polo shirt with his lawyer, and asked for a meeting. Miss Okafor told me I didn't have to be there. I said I wanted to be there. Warren looked older than I remembered, which was strange because I'd seen him 8 months ago at my mother's funeral, but something had shifted in his face. He looked like a man who had been very certain about something for a very long time, and had recently stopped being certain. His lawyer did most of the talking. Expressions of sympathy, acknowledgement of the extraordinary circumstances, a proposal, a negotiated settlement. Warren would release a portion of the estate voluntarily in exchange for my agreement not to pursue further claims. The portion he was proposing was $50,000. I looked at Warren while his lawyer talked. Warren didn't look at me. He looked at the table. She was a child, I said. Warren's lawyer kept talking. She was a 3-month-old child, I said, louder, and everyone stopped. And someone bought her. And the money that bought her funded an entire life. A house, a marriage, a retirement account. And you want to offer me $50,000 and call it settled? Warren finally looked at me. I didn't know, he said. His voice was quiet. When I married your mother, I didn't know. When did you find out? He didn't answer immediately. That pause told me everything. It was after I was in high school, I said, wasn't it? His jaw tightened. You found out, and you stayed, because leaving would have meant explaining why you were leaving, and explaining why you were leaving might have unraveled everything. So you just stayed, and you were cold to me, because I was the thing you couldn't talk about, he said. You have to understand what position that put me in. And I thought about being 6 years old and not understanding why my new stepfather wouldn't hug me. I thought about being 14 and watching him hang his daughter's school photos on the mantle and not mine. I thought about his voice on the phone. You were never really mine. I thought, he wasn't wrong. I was never really his. But I was never really anyone's. Not in the way a child is supposed to be. Because I had been taken from the people I was supposed to belong to, and given to someone who paid for me, and raised by that person's husband who knew what I was and never said a word. I understand exactly what position it put you in, I said. I understand it completely, and I need you to understand what position it put me in. The constructive trust claim took 7 months to resolve. I won't pretend it was clean or fast, or that I felt triumphant at the end of it. Mostly I felt tired. There were depositions and document requests, and a month where Miss Okafor called me every other day, with some new development that I had to process while sitting in a laundry room because it was the only quiet space in my colleague's apartment. What the forensic accountants found. My mother had received the $40,000 from a joint savings account she'd had with a man who had since died. The house she and Warren later bought had a down payment that traced back, partially, to that same source of funds. The life she had built, the one Warren inherited, had its foundation, however indirect, in the purchase of a child. The court agreed with Miss Okafor. Warren got the contents of their joint checking account at the time of my mother's death. He got his pension, which was his alone. He got his car. Everything else, the house, the savings, the life insurance, the investments, was subject to the constructive trust finding. It came to me. It came to Cecilia Drummond. I should tell you about my mother. My real mother. Her name is Paulette. She is 61 years old. She lives in a small house in the Newell neighborhood of Charlotte, 20 minutes from where I was born. She has a garden. She grows tomatoes and basil and something she calls the aggressive mint that has taken over an entire corner of her yard. My brother's name is Derek. He's a high school's history teacher. He coaches JV soccer. He has a daughter named after someone in his wife's family, which I only mention because when I met her, this small, serious 4-year-old, she walked up to me and said, "You look like my dad," and then walked away, and I had to go stand in Paulette's bathroom for about 5 minutes before I could come back out. The first time I met Paulette was in the parking lot of a Panera Bread in Charlotte, which is not a romantic or cinematic location, but it's what happened. The FBI victim's advocate had arranged it. We both arrived early. We stood next to our cars, her minivan, my Civic with the cracked mirror, and looked at each other across 12 feet of asphalt. She said, "You have your grandmother's eyes." I said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I don't remember any of this." She crossed those 12 feet and put her arms around me, and I felt her shaking, and I realized after a moment that I was shaking too. We stood in that parking lot for a long time. There are things I still don't know. I don't know if I'll ever feel fully like Cecilia instead of Leah. I don't know how to grieve my mother, the one who raised me. And also be angry at her. And also understand that love and wrongdoing can exist in the same person at the same time. And none of those things cancel each other out. I don't know what Warren knew, or when he knew it, or whether it would have changed anything if he'd told me. I don't know if I would have wanted to know. I know that I have a family now that I didn't know I had. I know that Paulette texts me pictures of her tomatoes, and that Derek sends me history podcasts I never listen to, but always mean to. I know that my niece told me last month that I'm her favorite aunt, which she delivered with the same gravity she delivers all statements, and which I found unexpectedly devastating in the best way. I know that Gerald the plant made the move to Paulette's house, where he sits on her kitchen windowsill in Charlotte, and she talks to him when she waters him, and he is frankly thriving. Warren's attorney filed one more motion. 6 weeks after the Constructive Trust ruling, it was denied. I was in Paulette's garden when Miss Okafor called to tell me. Paulette was showing me which tomatoes were ready and which needed another week. The aggressive mint was doing what the aggressive mint does. It was early October, and the light was coming through the trees at that low gold angle that makes everything look like the end of something. Miss Okafor said, "It's over." I looked at Paulette, who was holding a tomato in each hand and saying something about drainage that I wasn't fully following. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." I hung up. Paulette looked at me. "Everything all right?" I thought about a DMV on a Tuesday, a woman who didn't look up, a folder on a folding table, a baby on a missing child flyer who was me and wasn't me and was me again. "Yeah," I said. "I think everything's actually okay." She handed me one of the tomatoes. It was warm from the sun, and it fit perfectly in my hand, and I stood there in that October light and held it, and I thought, this is what it feels like to be somewhere you were always supposed to be.